Cohort. We're going to spend a few minutes today talking you through our beloved community operating model so that you have a stronger sense of who we are as we come into this work and the perspectives that we'll share, particularly as we're leading this inaugural cohort of nonprofit communities in Memphis. So with the beloved community, we, we support sustainable change for regions as they're looking at economic equity and economic growth. We work at the nexus of education, housing, and the workplace. Most of what we're going to talk about during our Equity at Work cohort focuses on how equity shows up in the workplace and how that impacts our greater region sustainability. We believe that people change systems. And with that, it means that we center people first in our work. We hope that you'll experience in every single session an opportunity to be known, to be seen, to be understood, and to have your voice come to bear for the changes and support that you need to lead work in your organization. We think that if we start first with the people piece, as individuals, we can each lead the change that matters for the systems that we're trying to rebuild. Our theory of change centers on three things. First, equity is economic development. You'll hear us talk about economics a lot throughout the workshop series, and we believe that's because we have to get to the finance parts that underscore and underline equity disparities that we've been experiencing in our country for centuries. We also work on policy advocacy for diverse schools and diverse housing, from a housing perspective, particularly looking at smart mixed housing and inclusionary zoning. Most of what we'll experience together in the cohort comes on the third piece of our theory, which is capacity building for workforce of the future. Here, we're building and leading regional coalitions and communities of practices like this one in order to help provide stronger support for diverse populations, diverse talent pipelines, and diverse leadership in the region. We take a head and heart approach to all of our work. Oftentimes, when people think about equity and inclusion, they send the people-facing and the heart-facing team members out to do external community engagement work. And while we know that the heart leadership matters a lot, within all of our facilitations, we pair that with a head-centered opportunity to learn as well. As I mentioned before, we talk about finance a lot throughout the series, and that means that when you're actually doing your studies with us, in order to get to sustainable change for equity for your organization, that means that we're questioning governance, finance, operations, program, and culture. Some of you may be coming in thinking, I'm really a heart person, right? I wrote intentions about this morning. I'll be journaling throughout the experience. I'm excited to share more about my perspective and learn from others in the room. And some of you are thinking, I'm much more of a head person. I'm looking for the data, I'm looking for the research. I'd like to dig into some CSV files and case studies. And some of you may be thinking, yeah, I'm a little bit of both. There's room for all of you and room for all of these perspectives within the Beloved Community approach. Again, during every facilitation, we'll give you resources that help with the personal reflection and that give you some concrete fodder, concrete tools that you can bring back to your teams, bring back to your board, bring back to your target communities as you are sharing your own equity journey with them. We've developed a mutual accountability framework that you'll experience during the cohort. And with this framework, what we're really looking at are opportunities to look at our personal work, our work in stakeholder groups, and our absolute performance for our organization and ultimately for the region. And so in this outer ring, when we say observe and identify our own behavior, I'm really asking myself questions about how I am showing up in the work, how I can make improvements and shifts in my own behavior to lead towards equity. When we look at that orange band, the internal equity audits, we're really looking at it by stakeholder group. What are we doing as a leadership team? What are our opportunities as a staff, as board members, as community partners to advance equity, diversity, and inclusion within our own group? And then ultimately looking at our absolute performance outcomes for the organization and for the target populations that we serve. We believe that when you are able to enact a mutual accountability framework like this one, it starts to decrease the amount of finger pointing that happens across the table that says, you're not providing enough staff of color in this organization for me to feel safe. How do we also start to think about my own responsibility and growth in those areas? So what we offer, Beloved Community has a set of organizational and individual equity assessments that you'll experience during during our cohort. The equity audit is an organizational tool where you're really looking at your entire organization's practice, governance and leadership, supplier diversity, resource and finance, pedagogies or curriculum, talent and adult culture, also youth culture if you're a youth facing organization. And then the equity lens map is a personal assessment that's looking at how am I progressing and what types of supports do I need in my organization in order to be more fully engaged in naming, identifying, and disrupting inequitable practices at play. Instead of having everyone memorize definitions, we pose 3 questions to help us that we think we can take into any conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So the diversity question, to what extent does our population reflect our regional demographics? When you think about diversity, we ask you to push beyond the physical diversity of race and ethnicity or gender or sex, and really think about the demographics that matter most in your region, that matter most for the community that you serve, or matter most for the type of organization, the actual content and function of your work. Our framing question for equity, to what extent are the outcomes from your program predictable by participants' demographics? And then our question for inclusion is really pushing on understandings of shared voice and shared power. So, to what extent do our diverse populations feel comfortable, respected, and empowered within our organization? To what extent are their perspectives included in decision making that impacts their lives, that impacts their success in the work that we do? We believe that if you ask any of these questions in a meeting with any stakeholder group, they will help you to dig into longer term solutions. Within the equity audit, we've introduced those 3 standard areas, and then in each of them, a set of substandards. So, our diversity substandards, equity substandards, and inclusion substandards are designed to help you identify and diagnose where your organization needs to begin their next steps for this work. So, within diversity, you have awareness, which would indicate a need for marketing and outreach. You have application substandards, which indicates a need to work on your access, who has access to your organization, and any roles in it. For selection, it's really looking at how you're making decisions for your HR practices, for community participation, for anything where you have a selection process. Is selection bias keeping you from reaching your diverse representation? And then participation is asking, are people actually showing up? Is this diverse representation that you have marketed to, that have applied for your work, that you've even selected, actually choosing to do this work with you? In the equity substandards, we look at audits and access first. Are you even auditing any of these things? Are you asking yourself any of these questions about who has access to your organization? Assignment is looking at what roles people come into when they're initially brought into the organization. Advancement is looking at not just advancement into management or leadership roles, but transparency and understanding about how performance is managed here, how performance is supported here, what professional development supports are available to me. The financial substandard is looking at things like pay equity, equity across budgets, across regions, across programs. Even for your subcontractors and vendors, you may be thinking about which contracts have shorter duration versus longer durations. And then your performance outcomes, what are the actual outcomes you're getting for your organization for any stakeholder groups? And then finally, in the inclusion substandards, we start off with language. What's your commitment to in print and in person communication? Communicating your intents to be inclusive, your intents to develop more equitable practices. Then shared voice and shared power. Ask about the tables that you've set, the tools that you've made available within your community for other people to bring their voice to bear. So this might look like client satisfaction surveys or employee climate surveys. It may look like town halls or advisory councils. What are the systems that you've put into place officially in order to collect more data from your target populations? And then belonging looks at the reverse of that, right? You've set the table. I may show up to your table, but when I got there, did I feel like my voice mattered or that my voice is being tokenized? And this again helps you to look at this for all of your different stakeholders. And then finally, cultural relevance is the bookend here with language. Are the practices from program, pedagogy, operations to celebration relevant for the communities that you serve? And do the community members themselves have an opportunity to bring their positive praise and constructive criticism and feedback to the cultural relevance that you're trying to establish? Within these tools, we mentioned earlier the equity audit is the organizational tool. It's free and it's online. You can use it. You will actually do an equity audit while you're in this cohort with us, but you can also recommend it to your peers and other organizations. It's designed for schools, nonprofits, and for-profit corporations. You complete a user profile that helps to customize the content that you see that matches your organization. And once you complete it, you receive an immediate standard overview of your performance. And then there are, for folks who are not in the cohort, there are some fee-based detailed reports that are available later. The Equity Lens Map is an individual assessment that accompanies the equity audit that really helps look at what individual employees are experiencing and how, as an employer, you can start to differentiate your supports for professional development with all of your employees, both for their individual success and for your organization's trajectory with your DEI strategies and goals. We do provide capacity building services, and so we'll give you a quick overview of those. We do lots of training where we work with organizations in increments as short as 90 minutes to full day or multi-day trainings. Some of the most common topics that we're asked to present on are identities and bias, including intersectionality, embedding data in your equity plan, equity and performance management, and community engagement. If you have organizations or peers who are interested in training and who didn't join the cohort, feel free to have them contact us, and we're happy to talk through what their needs might be and how we can help. Clearly in the middle, we have our cohort experience, which is what we're getting ready to embark upon. So here we design an 8-month curriculum that's really based on our understanding of the most common pain points that organizations have in establishing sustainable practices for diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're building a community of practice here, so you'll have a time to interact with your functional peers, so HR, operations directors, and other organizations who are also trying to advance their equity understandings, as well as time to work deeply within your team and time for personal reflection. We do cohorts for schools, so you have equity in schools cohorts, and we also have equity at work cohorts so that you're able to have more peer interactions within that work. It's key when we're designing our cohorts that we have key leadership from the organization present so that they're able to impact change and influence within their specific strands of each organization. And then we do deep dive multi-year support. So we have a few clients a year who engage us for long-term supports where we do assessments with them, we provide some intensive leadership coaching, and we help build out their operational needs. So in addition to getting to that equity work plan in the end, then we also will build maybe components of an onboarding plan or components of their talent curriculum or components of their HR performance management system, develop, train the trainers, and prepare their middle management to take over all of those responsibilities. Our team, who you'll meet soon, I'm Rhonda Broussard. I'm narrating our talk today. Leslie Brown Rawlings is based in Memphis. She's our Director of Capacity Building. Nicole Caridad Ralston is our Associate Director of Education and Programming. She's based in New Orleans. Lauren Young is our Data Strategist, who's based in St. Louis. And Erica Friedman is our Operations Manager, also based in New Orleans. We look forward to meeting you all soon. Please let us know if you have any questions in the meantime. At Beloved Community, we really do hold true to this, that if we are not using equity as our framework and our lens, it's impossible to get different outcomes. We're excited that you're agreeing to pick up this new lens with us and to think about what this new lens applied to Memphis will mean for your entire community. Take care.